Hey, welcome back to PetaPixel. It is Chris Nichols here. Today we are looking at the top 135mm 1.8s from the big three, Sony, Canon, and Nikon full frame. We're gonna do a shootout. So today we're looking at the Sony G Master 135mm f1.8, the Canon 135-1.8L series, and the Nikon Plena 135 f1.8. Now I know you might be wondering, why aren't we comparing this against the Sigma 135? Well, those are SLR designs. We want to stick to things that are mirrorless. We'd love to see updates of third-party lenses in these mounts, but we don't have them yet. And then what about the Fujifilm 90mm? Well, that's APS-C. I know it's a similar focal length, but we want to keep things just full frame. I mean, God, people, how long do you want this video to be? Okay, anyways. Jordan and I both love the 135mm focal length. Woo! I mean, yeah, see, there you go. They're beautiful portrait lenses for head and shoulders work, but they're also fantastic for full body environmental portraiture. You know, you just get this really gorgeous compression to them. Now, today's video is a little bit different because look, normally when we do a shootout between Sony, Canon, and Nikon bodies, you might actually be looking for that because you haven't decided which brand to go for. But when we're looking at lenses, you're already into the mount. I mean, I'm not saying, oh, if you have a G Master, maybe you should buy a Canon L series or a Plena. That doesn't make any sense. But you know, when we test these lenses individually, we see their characteristics, but we never really get a big picture of how do they compare against the other manufacturers. And the fact is, all three of these lenses are very recent, and usually manufacturers use 135s as a great test bed just to show what they can do optically. So for my own curiosity, I'm really excited to see how these three lenses compare against each other, against a set of tests. And for you guys, this will give you the opportunity to be really loyal to your brand and go on the forums and just threaten each other's mothers and, you know, wish horrible things upon each other, and you're gonna love it. So let's get to the video. Now, before we get into what's different about these three lenses, let's talk about what's actually quite similar about them. So the Sony is going to be in the middle of the pack weight-wise, about 950 grams. The Canon is the lightest at 935, but just barely. And then the Nikon Plena is exactly one Plena in weight. It's 995 grams. But in the end, they're all very similar. All rugged, all weather-sealed, fast autofocusing motors. No issues there. Nice customizable buttons on these lenses, control rings. I mean, they're full-featured lenses. Price-wise is interesting. The Sony and the Canon are basically the same at around $2,100 US, but the Nikkor Plena is more expensive. It's $2,400 US. Let's see if that extra cost does pay dividends in terms of image quality. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is talk about flare. Now we could go outside, but the fact of the matter is we've had a wonderful winter. It's been super warm, but this week is icy and cold. It's actually colder than the coldest level of hell in Dante's Inferno. So we've decided to do this shot indoors. Plus it gives us a good repeatable test where I can compare all three exactly apples to apples. So I'm shooting this right towards the cob light. I did both a test where the light is directly in the frame and then just outside the frame like you would shoot the sun. And so starting with the Sony G Master, you can see here, shooting the lens directly towards the light, I actually still handled it really well. I mean, minimal loss of contrast, not a lot of ghosting, even when stopped down. I was surprised by that. And then when the light is just outside the frame, it's a similar story. When I go to the Nikkor Plena, it was very similar as well. Again, great control, not a big loss of contrast, not a lot of major ghosting, even stop down. Whether I was shooting direct or indirect towards the light, I was really happy with the performance there. The Canon 135, this is where it has some issues. You can see you're shooting directly into the light source. Lots of flare, a loss of contrast. Even when the light is outside of the frame, we're getting quite a bit of ghosting. Wide open, certainly though we stop down to f8, there's a lot of ghosting there. So certainly I would say Sony and Nikon win the flare contest. Canon does have some work to do. Okay, next let's talk about LoCA, longitudinal chromatic aberrations. That's where we're gonna see color fringing in the foreground and background, out of focus areas, you know, especially if you're shooting on something that's got bright reflectivity, and it's something that's very hard to get rid of in post, so you don't want it. I'm using my classic LoCA example, my silver string, which I picked up in a dirty alleyway covered in God knows what, but I glued it to my test chart. It does a great job. So first, let's take a look at the Sony G Master. So here we actually do see some LoCA. You can see a bit of a cyan green kind of color in the areas that are beyond the point of focus, and then in front of it, pinkish orange hue. It's not major. It would still be fairly easy to deal with, but it's definitely there. Looking at the Canon 135, LoCA was clean, like no color fringing whatsoever, nothing to cleanup, that's an optimum result. And the Nikkor Plena did the same thing. Clean, no color cast in the foreground and background out of focus areas. And especially when you're shooting telephotos with wide apertures like this, LoCA is something that will rear its ugly head. And if you've got the G Master, you're gonna watch for that. Now, all three of these lenses are beautiful, shallow depth of field portrait lenses. So let's talk about bokeh next. Bokeh is subjective. Everybody's gonna have a different look that they like or a different kind of rendering that they like. But I've tested all three of these lenses and I think they all shoot beautiful out of focus areas. Transitions from in focus to out of focus are soft and smooth. Your backgrounds are just big bubbles of color and there's no frenetic energy, there's no busyness. I really think they all render really nicely. But we did want to see what the specular highlights are like. So we did a test here. We got Jordan set up holding some Christmas lights. Let's take a look at specular highlights next. Okay, so we've got our bokeh test here set up, and you know what does look silly is Jordan with these Christmas lights behind him, but it's gonna work. What isn't silly though is the fill light that we're using on him. I've got the Westcott L60B cob light. It's small, but it's got plenty of strength, so I can blast it through this rapid box Octa S, you know, and still get good power. And I can also dial the temperature in from warm interior lighting all the way to cold shade blue, so it's easy to match with the window light that I have here as a fill on Jordan. So that's why Westcott is our preferred lighting partner here on PetaPixel. So using this and the fill light and the Christmas lights, we're not overpowering everything. Everything matches nice. Let's get to it. So with the Sony G Master, you're going to see very clean specular highlights. Shooting here at 1.8, there's quite a bit of cat's eye in the corners, and I actually don't mind that. I mean, these football shapes of specular highlights can be really beautiful around a person's face if you can use them to frame the subject. I do really like that. When you stop down here to 2.8, that does largely go away. The Canon 135 also has some cat's eye vignetting, and I actually prefer the Sony's because you get that sort of sharp football shape, whereas the Canon kind of gets a rounded corner. Stopping down to 2.8, again, beautiful, nice round bokeh, no polygonal shapes or anything like that. And again, we're not seeing soap bubbles or onion rings or anything. And lastly, let's take a look at the Nikkor 135mm Plena. So Nikon stated very clearly when we tested this lenses, they went through extra work to make sure that there was no cat's eye, no mechanical vignetting, nothing like that. And as you can see here shooting wide open at 1.8, our specular highlights are nice and round, even to the corners. When you stop down again, they're beautiful. And so that should give you really nice soft backgrounds. If you prefer that look, the Nikkor Plena is absolutely the winner when it comes to round specular highlights. Lastly, let's take a look at sharpness here, starting with the Sony G Master. When shooting this lens in the center f1.8, I actually found it have the lowest contrast of the three lenses. Still good detail, it's sharp. I would happily shoot it wide open. Going to f4 really solved that though. Everything sharpens up nicely, lots of contrast. Corners, it's the same story. When shooting it wide open at 1.8 though, there is good detail in the corners, just not a lot of contrast. Stopping down the lens to f4, I actually found it sharpened up really, really nicely. So now let's take a look at the Canon 135mm. Shooting wide open in the centers at f1.8, I actually found this lens to be the sharpest. It had great detail, nice contrast in the centers wide open. That's a really nice result. Stopping out at f4, I just really didn't notice much improvement. It was already really good. The corners are a different story though. The Canon 135mm at 1.8, the corners are noticeably the softest of the three. And stopping out at f4 helps a little bit, but not a lot. Now take a look at the Nikkor Plena here in the center shooting wide open at 1.8. Fantastic detail, almost as good as the Canon. Lots of contrast too, really punchy look to the photos there wide open. Shooting f4, things sharpen up a little bit, it looks great across the frame. When we go to the corners in the Nikkor Plena, excellent results. I mean, very flat shooting lens. 1.8 was good detail. Stopping down at f4, you can see here is excellent. The Nikkor was probably the most consistent from center to corner across the frame, whereas the Sony, I found you have to specifically focus center to corner if you want to get the best detail possible, and the Canon just had a struggle with those corners ever sharpening up. Okay, so let's take a look at how our lenses did here, starting with the Sony G Master. I mean, one thing to make note of is this is the oldest of these three lenses by far. It's been out for quite a few years, and it actually really blew us away with its image quality when we first played with it, and it still does. I mean, it's consistently sharp. I really like the bokeh, the rendering of the background. I don't mind the cat's eye. I think that can actually be quite pleasing, but that'll be subjective. It handled flare really well. It autofocuses quickly. I mean, this is a really good purchase. Its only real weakness is the LoCA performance. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Canon L Series 135. This is the lens I've had the least amount of time to play with compared to the other two, so I was happy to finally be able to test it further today. This lens I would say is the quirkiest of the three. I mean, sharpness-wise, 1.8 in the center is gorgeous, but the corners are soft. Most portrait situations, you don't really worry about the corners that much, but still, I would like to see better consistency. Flare resistance as well. Some people love it when you do backlit portraits and the flare just, you know, blows out the background. It gives you this wash of light, but I do prefer my lens lenses be a little bit better controlled, and this is not handled light that well. Bokeh was nice though. I mean, the lens handles beautifully, and it is important to note that this is the only lens that has image stabilization of the three. Now, all of these bodies we're using today have IBIS, but if you were going to throw this on a body that didn't have that, say one of the older bodies or some of the cinematic cameras, then this is going to be a really nice benefit. And finally, the Nikkor Plena 135mm 1.8. So this is the most expensive of the three lenses, but it seems to be paying off because this lens is absolutely consistent. Beautiful bokeh, no vignetting whatsoever. It's a sharp lens, consistent from center to corner, handles flare well. I mean, this lens really doesn't have any weaknesses. So yes, it is more expensive and bulkier and even heavier than the other lenses, but there is benefits to that extra cost. I hope you guys found this enjoyable, taking a look at these three top-tier 135mm lenses. Regardless, however you go, whatever brand you happen to have, I feel like one of these lenses is a great choice for you. They're so handy to have for beautiful environmental portraits and just gorgeous, soft, out of focus areas. Leave your comments below. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any of these lenses and you want to share any results that you have. We appreciate all the comments as always. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And you know what? Check out our podcast. We'd love if you subscribe to that as well. It's on the same channel here. You can watch us talking, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps. Just search for the PetaPixel podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon with more episodes on PetaPixel.